The young man who partied recklessly and squandered his father's money learned his lesson the hard way. Guys, this story will amaze you. Grab your popcorn, relax, and enjoy as I take you on this journey. Even if you've watched this movie before, you may not have noticed the real lessons and hidden secrets in the story, and that's why we're here for you. Welcome to this channel. If you're just joining us, make sure you subscribe to get more stories like this from us. The story begins with Toby at a club, partying and throwing money at girls, while his father, who was at home, suddenly received a debit alert of 10 million naira. He shouted in shock, and his wife immediately rushed to him, asking what had happened. He told her, blaming her for spoiling their son. She calmed him down and promised to talk to Toby, though he kept ranting in anger. Later that night, Toby returned home, still holding a drink. His mother asked him to sit down so they could talk. He complied at first, but as she started speaking, he grew impatient, stood up, and told her he'd talk to her tomorrow before walking away. She called him back, but he refused to listen. The next morning, they hired a housekeeper, Onome, and told her salary would be 100,000 naira per month. She expressed her gratitude. Later that day, Toby returned home and saw Onome, the new housekeeper. He asked who she was, and she introduced herself. Toby, unimpressed, asked how many housekeepers his parents planned to change, and sarcastically hoped she wasn't as incompetent as the previous ones. Onome didn't reply as he continued insulting her before walking away. That same day, Toby's mom asked Onome what she was preparing for dinner. Onome said she was cooking beans. Toby's mom immediately told her that her son didn't like beans and instructed her to prepare something else. At that moment, Toby's dad came out and told Onome to go ahead with the beans. His wife tried to remind him that Toby didn't like beans, but he insisted. That night, Toby joined them for dinner, and upon seeing beans, he shouted, saying they knew he didn't like beans, called the food bullshit, and walked out. His father called him back, but Toby ignored him, which made his father angry. The next morning, Onome was cleaning the house when Toby came and called her an insulting name. She hesitated to respond, so he shouted at her, promising she wouldn't last a week in the house. He then asked her to get him water, and she left. After a while, she returned with the water, but Toby told her he didn't need it anymore. He threw money on the floor and told her he wanted freshly made orange juice in 30 minutes. Onome picked up the money and left. Later, Onome returned with the juice, but Toby refused it, saying he had changed his mind. He now wanted freshly made bitter leaf soup with pounded yam. This time, Onome wisely ignored him and walked away, refusing to entertain his demands. Toby smirked to himself and said, "Let the games begin." Later that night, while Onome was asleep, Toby entered her room and poured a bowl of water on her. She woke up in shock, shouting, and Toby warned her not to repeat what she did earlier that day before leaving. The next day, Toby was at home with his friends, drinking and enjoying themselves. His father walked in, saw them, shook his head in frustration, and left without saying a word. Later that day, Toby's mom came home and found her husband looking worried. She asked him what the issue was, and he told her that he would soon be contesting for the senatorial election in his state. He expressed his doubt, asking how he could lead an entire state when he couldn't even manage his own son. His wife tried to calm him, cheering him up and assuring him that everything would be fine. That night, Toby's mom couldn't sleep. Onome noticed her and asked what was bothering her. She shared her story, explaining that she was raised in the slums and suffered greatly. She said she didn't want her son to go through the same struggles, which is why she gave him everything he ever wanted, not realizing he would turn out this way. Onome consoled her. The next morning, the family prepared to attend a wedding, but Toby was nowhere to be found. His father became angry and left with his wife without waiting for him. Later that night, Toby returned home and found Onome worried because his parents hadn't returned since leaving for the wedding. Toby immediately tried calling them, but their phones were switched off, and he began to worry. The following morning, Toby contacted the police. After searching for his parents, the police found their car abandoned, but there was no sign of them inside. Guys, I just hope these people are safe. The police declared it a case of abduction and advised Toby to keep his phone close at all times, as the kidnappers might call to demand ransom, and he left, promising to find his parents. Later that night, Toby went out with his friends. He was visibly down, and although they tried to cheer him up, he didn't respond. Eventually, he stood up angrily and walked out. After some time, he returned and called the bartender to settle the bill. Unfortunately, none of his cards worked. They had all been blocked. Left stranded, his friends abandoned him. Toby eventually found a way to settle the bill and returned home, furious that all his cards had been blocked. He rudely called Onome, demanding water. Onome asked if he was sure he wanted water this time, or if he'd change his mind again, which annoyed Toby. He stood up and threatened her, but this time, Onome got angry, held his ear, and warned him that she was not his maid before walking away. A while later, Toby provoked Onome again. This time, she chased him out of the house, leaving him outside for mosquitoes to feast on. Toby screamed in pain, begging Onome to let him back in. Onome eventually opened the door, but gave him conditions. He had to promise never to disrespect her again. Toby agreed and was allowed back inside. Later that night, after eating, Toby surprisingly said thank you to Onome. As he was about to leave, Onome stopped him and asked him to carry his plates to the kitchen. Toby humbly complied. The next morning at 5 a.m., Onome entered Toby's room and woke him up with a stick. When he insulted her, she threatened to flog him and instructed him to arrange his room in 5 minutes, warning that she would return to check. Toby quickly stood up and started tidying up. The following day, there was no food at home. Onome suggested they go out to hawk water, but Toby refused and stayed hungry. Eventually, he went to his friend's house, begging for food. They told him they didn't have any and claimed they hadn't eaten in 2 days. Toby then asked for money, but they said they didn't have any either. Feeling dejected, he stood up and left. However, Toby forgot his bag and returned to retrieve it, only to find his so-called friends secretly eating food they had hidden. Heartbroken, he left in disappointment. The friends didn't seem to care and remarked to each other that since Toby no longer had anything to offer and his parents wouldn't be found again, they should find new wealthy friends to hang out with. Toby returned home tired and disappointed. Onome noticed his number had been unreachable and asked if he was okay. Toby assured her he was fine and went to his room. The next day, Toby took all his jewelry to sell, but was attacked by robbers who took everything from him. He passed out from the shock and only managed to return home later, crying throughout the night as he regretted his actions. The following day, Toby decided to join Onome in hawking water. She was surprised but agreed. While hawking, Toby fainted and had to be rushed home. Later, he apologized, explaining that it was his first time and promised to do better the next day. Onome suggested they consider another business, but Toby insisted he would be fine. Before leaving, he called her Auntie Onome for the first time, thanked her, and she smiled. The next day, they went hawking again. This time, Toby was lively, and they made good sales. When they returned home, Toby offered Onome the money he earned, but she told him to keep it, saying it was the first money he had ever made. Toby appreciated her gesture. That night, Toby stared at a picture of his parents, promising to be a better son to them, and then fell asleep. The next day, Toby decided to cook for the first time. He followed a recipe on YouTube despite Onome's doubts. When he finished, he served Onome a portion. To his delight, she liked the food and complimented him, saying it was nice. Toby was very happy, knowing he had successfully prepared his first meal. The following day, they went out to hawk again and returned home to a surprise. Toby's parents were back. He quickly ran to hug them passionately, and they were equally overjoyed to see him. Later, his parents revealed that they had been kidnapped by a political rival who didn't want Toby's father to contest the election. The police assured them they were working on finding the kidnappers. That evening, Toby decided to cook for his parents. When they tasted the food, they assumed Onome had made it, but she surprised them by revealing that Toby had cooked it himself. They laughed in disbelief, as Toby had never even boiled water before, let alone cooked a proper meal. They were truly proud of him, shocked. The next morning, Toby's mom woke up and saw him cleaning. She quickly went to wake her husband, and they both came downstairs to spy on him. They saw Toby happily cleaning and were utterly surprised. Still in shock, they went back to their room, talking about what they had just witnessed. At that moment, Toby walked in, greeted them, something he had never done before, and asked if there was anything he could do for them. They said no, and as he turned to leave, he paused, looked back, and sincerely apologized for all his past wrongdoings. He promised to be a better son and then left, leaving his parents speechless. From that day forward, Toby became a good son. He started doing house chores, helping his father with work, and completely stopped partying. As a reward for his remarkable change, his father gifted him a phone. Toby hugged his parents in gratitude. The next day, Toby's parents called Onome to thank her for transforming their son. They asked her to bring her CV so they could find her a better job, but she politely declined, saying she enjoyed working with the family. They respected her decision and increased her salary. Onome was overjoyed and expressed her gratitude. The following day, Toby went shopping for the house. As he was about to enter his car to return home, his old friends approached him, trying to reconcile. They admitted their mistakes and asked for forgiveness. Toby forgave them, but when they asked him for a ride, he got into his car and drove off without letting them in. They were left standing there, regretting how they had treated him. A few days later, Toby's father won the election and became the new senator of the state. The family celebrated the victory at home, making a toast to a brighter future. They also expressed their gratitude to Onome for everything she had done for the family. And so the family lived happily ever after. Wow, guys, what an amazing story. Toby's transformation is truly inspiring. Thank you for watching this incredible story in my world of movies. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories like this. See you in our next movie.
Thank you.